Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Husqvarna 326LD string trimmer. The customer complaint is that it's just not running right. So I want to do a test run on this thing, but first I'm going to look in the fuel tank and make sure it's got clean, fresh fuel in it. And the fuel, it smelled pretty good. So let's fire this thing up and see what it acts like. Okay, so that didn't run very well. And on top of that, there's no air filter in it. Now, the air filter is just a foam block. And I have seen these break down and get sucked up into the engine. But there's no trace of a filter at all. And I wonder if the customer just removed it. There wasn't anything on the work order about it needing an air filter. Certainly it'll get one before it gets sent back to the customer. So the best way to work on these things, no matter what the problem is to get the engine cover off of it. And then you'll have full access to the top of the engine and the carburetor. It's nice and clean underneath here. Don't know where that air filter went. Let's pop the spark plug out of here and take a peek inside the cylinder. The spark plug looks like it's new. It's kind of odd that they would replace the spark plug and not the air filter. But the good news is that it looks clean inside the cylinder. The spark arrestor screen looks good. This is probably going to be just a simple fuel system problem. So I'm going to want to dump the fuel out of here. And that's going to give me a chance to see if there's any water in this fuel or not. Now you'll notice I already have fuel in the container. I know that's good fuel in there. I know there's no water in the bottom of the funnel. And if there was water in this trimmer, that would now be at the bottom of my funnel. But there's none in there, so we're good to go. Alright, let's pull the fuel line and filter out of here and see what that looks like. We got a rubber fuel hose and an old filter. I'm going to pressure test that fuel line and see if it's any good or not. I'm going to put 10 pounds of pressure on here. £10, let it sit for a minute, and it's not leaking. It tells me that the carburetor's tight, the fuel line's good. We're just going to push a new filter on here and be happy with that. So the next step is going to be to dig into the carburetor. Clean a little bit of schmutz off of here. We'll get our spark plug put away. Torque down to spec. Alright. 2 screws that run through I'm going to say air filter holder, for lack of a better term, and then through the carburetor into the insulation block. So there's our two long screws, and that intake, what did I call it? Air filter holder? That kind of stays in place. There's a third screw that locates it, so we're going to leave it right where it is. We'll take our throttle wire off the carburetor, and then there's going to be two fuel lines. This one's coming off the back of the purge bulb. Look how dark brown that fuel line is. And then that black one that we pressure tested, that comes up to the carburetor. Pop that off of there. We're just kind of inspecting the lines and the grommets right there. Everything looked good. There wasn't any evidence of a big leak or anything like that. So now it's time to open up the carb and see what there is to see in here. We suspect that our running issue is in this carburetor. Let's see if it's obvious or not. Here's our fuel pump and our micro screen. And the micro screen looks good. There's not anything going on there. One little piece of debris I noticed, but that's not a running issue problem. Let's take a look at the metering diaphragm. We're going to pop these two screws off of the cover. That's right up there with one of the worst ones I've ever seen. Bam! So we're going to put a new carb kit in here. So that stiff metering diaphragm doesn't allow the proper amount of fuel in and out of the metering chamber of the carburetor. So it can be temporarily starving for fuel or temporarily flooding while it's running. What we need is a pliable metering diaphragm that can respond to the needs of the engine. And we're going to put one in there. Sped this up a little bit just to get through it, but we're just replacing the gaskets that were in there. We're not looking at the high and the low speed needles because we ran it and we know it ran close to the way it should be. I don't think that there's a issue with it being plugged up. So we've got our gaskets installed. Taking a look at the fuel lines again, trying to decide, am I going to let that one ride or not? And the one that comes out of the tank, we're going to leave in there. But that short line that ran from the purge bulb to the carburetor, that one's getting replaced. We're going to push it onto the carburetor first. Nice tight fit. So this line runs to the purge bulb, right? When we're putting the other line on right now. When we push the purge bulb, it pulls fuel through this line from the tank. So the pattern or the flow of fuel from the filter into the carburetor and then through this new yellow line to the purge bulb and then return back to the tank. Got our Z bend on our throttle wire connected here on the carburetor. There we go. And then we'll push that fuel line on the purge bulb. Purge bulb looks pretty bad, pretty dark, but it feels really good. I'm leaving it on there. Alright, our 2 long bolts that run through the carb. We got them torqued down. Little function check here. Make sure that the high speed function works on the choke lever. Everything looks good. Let's get this engine cover back on here. Once we get this bolted down, I'll fire it up and we'll see how it runs. I don't have, this is a split shaft, so I don't have an attachment on here. You'll notice me feel the end of the shaft. I'm just checking to see if that inner drive shaft is turning or not at idle. So the trim is going to sound like it's running kind of fast. And in the end, I'll put an attachment on here and test run it and do a final carburetor adjustment, but you won't get to see that. We'll put our known good fuel back into this trimmer. And that's all I'm going to have for you on the Husqvarna 326LD detachable trimmer that had a very stiff metering diaphragm. Thanks for watching. Later.